Good afternoon, everybody. I can see everyone coming in now, so I'm really excited that you're all able to join us here for the fourth in our Gender on the Agenda webinar series, focusing on a wide range of transport and gender-related issues. So our session today is looking at enhancing women's professional opportunities in transport, and we've got a really great lineup of speakers. My name's Clare Linton. I'm Policy and Research Advisor at the Urban Transport Group. We are sponsoring this series of events alongside MacDonald, and we think that kind of addressing equality, diversity and inclusion in the transport sector is really important and needs to be at the centre of our thinking in how we encourage transport to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. So we're really proud to be sponsoring this series of events, and I'm really excited to be chairing this session today, and really excited to hear from our great range of speakers. So I'll introduce them all briefly now and give them a bit more introduction before each of them present. So we've got Marny, Moruzzi and Sonya Byers from Women in Transport, speaking about the role of women in transport. We've got Philippa Green from the University of Sussex and Kate Myers from Crossrail International. So we've got a really, really great range of speakers, and I'm really excited to hear about their perspectives and expertise on how we enhance women's professional opportunities in the transport sector. We'll hear from each of the four speakers, and then there'll be plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. So if you have thoughts, questions, comments, pop them in the chat, and we'll pick those up later. And we've had a few through in advance too, so we've got a really great discussion already set up. So please feed in there. So we'll kick off with Marny Moruzzi, who is leading major transport and infrastructure projects and is Vice President for Women in Transport, and Sonya Byers, who is Chief Executive of Women in Transport, which was established in 2005 and is aimed at supporting women in the transport sector. So yeah, I'll hand over to Sonya and Marny to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Claire. I'm delighted to be here for this fourth session of the Gender on the Agenda series, and to talk about the focus of today, which is enhancing women's professional opportunities in the transport sector. And that really sums up our mission at Women in Transport. So we're an independent UK non-profit membership network. We're open to everyone, but our mission is to support the professional development of women working in the transport. Membership provides access to a varied events programme, networking opportunities, and our women members also benefit from access to mentors through our advanced mentoring programme and to leadership development via our lead programme, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly. We have two forums that promote and share best practice in the industry as well. So first up is our all-party parliamentary group for women in transport, and that's a cross-party group of MPs and peers launched in 2016. The group provides a forum to discuss and overcome the underrepresentation of women in the transport sector, and our Women in Transport acts as a secretariat for the APPG and supports parliamentarians to deliver its activities. If you haven't seen it already, there is currently an open consultation seeking views on the transport and labour market skills, which I encourage you to submit your views and ideas to. And we were really delighted to see a new task force called the Transport Employment and Skills Task Force, or TEST, launched during National Apprenticeship Week. This task force will lead on the charge on promoting careers in the transport sector, and it will be led by our patron, Rachel Skinner CBE, who will work alongside a representative group of industry leaders from across the transport sector to look at how we can break down barriers and attract diverse talent to our sector. Another initiative is our Diversity and Inclusion Bus Group, launched in 2019 with the key aim to promote and accelerate diversity and inclusion in the bus industry. The group is made up of like-minded peers from across a wide range of functions, levels and businesses, all working towards the same objective, to start making a difference. The group has been working on a major project that will launch later this month. The project is the concept of two of our amazing volunteers, Caroline Ward and Chloe Leach O'Connell, and it's thanks to their hard work that it's becoming a reality. It's called the Inclusive Employment Journey, and it's a project that's backed by the Confederation of Passenger Transport. It will see the concept will see the group create a central resource for the whole of the bus industry to use and benefit from. The journey will cover every step of employment, from community engagement and recruitment through to support with life after bus when long servers leave the industry. I'm really excited about what this project will help do for women and others across the bus industry. Returning to professional development for our women members, our lead development programme is 100% virtual, and it's been designed to be achievable along undertaking a full-time role. There are 6 modules to complete over 8 months with a team project collaboration. The programme runs 3 times a year, and each cohort is a maximum of 16 to 18 women. It's delivered by 2 leadership coaches and members of Women in Transport, Jill Howe and Ian Smith. And the programme now has run 3 times. It's supporting 45 talented women from almost 20 different transport organisations. Our first cohort graduated in November of last year, our second cohort started in September 2021, and cohort 3 started in January. The next cohort will launch in April 2022. Beyond the programme, what I'm really excited about is the legacy alumni network that's been formed and is owned and managed and run by the lead women to ensure it's tailored to their needs. This will mean they have a network of support for their entire careers. They will be visible role models for other women, and they will in turn empower others. And the feedback from the women on the lead programme is that making time for your own professional development is important for progression and retention. The practical tools and strategies they've gained in the programme have benefits for themselves, their teams and their organisation. And sharing and hearing from other women helps you feel heard, represented and supported. And those individual women have seen opportunities such as promotions, secondments and reverse mentoring. And I'm sure there will be many more to come. These all seem critical steps towards improving confidence and meeting their career aspirations. The other programme that we offer is the annual Advanced Mentoring Programme, which is now in its 4th year. We match women members with mentors external to their organisation that can support their individual professional objectives. The commitment is 6 one-hour sessions between January and September, and we provide matching training and a toolkit, and also peer-to-peer networking and support. Applications open each October and are followed by training and matching in November, and then pairs are introduced in December. We also run peer-to-peer engagement sessions in December, April and September. The programme was designed by myself and Angela Gainsford, who is a long-standing member of Women in Transport. We run the programme, and our brilliant volunteer engagement leads, Kirsten Gallier and Steve Griffiths, provide the peer-to-peer support. Mentees can be at any level in their career in transport. Mentors volunteer their time and are senior managers and above in the transport sector, and it's across gender. You can see on this slide just one example of the positive impacts of the Advanced Mentoring Programme from one of our members, the brilliant Charlie Barnes. But now I'm going to hand over to Marny, who's our Vice President, to share her experience as a member and a mentor on the programme. Over to you, Marny.
Thank you, Sonya. So, hello everybody. I'm really excited to be part of this event. Not only am I Vice President of Women in Transport, I'm an associate, I work in the industry. I'm currently, an associate at MacDonald. So for me personally, this is a fantastic event, and I just love the impact that we can make by having these conversations and these discussions and really sharing and learning. But my journey with Women in Transport has pretty much covered my entire career. So I joined Women in Transport when it was initially founded back in 2005, and I've been a member ever since, and slowly morphed from member to ambassador and helper and all sorts until last year when I was formally elected as Vice President. Really, I wanted to just explain a little bit like why is this important? Why do we need this? And I joined right back at the beginning because I needed a support network. I think a lot of people need to see role models. They need to understand the wider industry, and especially if you're new to the industry, we are a very diverse, very wide-ranging, very technical in some spaces type of industry. We're quite hands-on. we have not sat down during the pandemic. We've carried on motoring through. So as a member, having visible role models has been really important. Some of the things that we've continued on to do, from my point of view as a member, because I'm still a member, things like LEAD and having that alumni network to really reinforce the amazing work that's been done in the industry, to be able to share stories, to be able to help each other with technical excellence, to be able to look at innovation. Some of the events that we run have been fantastic. I mean, there's been some fun ones. I drove a bendy bus that didn't go so well, but there's been some really important ones where you really do learn about other parts of the transport industry, and having that window into something different and into what maybe the person that you may have met at an event 6 months ago actually does. That's really enlightening. I ended up getting involved in Women in Transport more as a sort of an ambassador, and really sort of making the voice more widely known in my networks, because I could see how important this was. That at that time there wasn't much conversation about women in transport. Now we're fortunate we have the APPG, and we have events like this, which are fantastic, but these haven't always been here. And it's a journey that is still going, pardon the transport pun, but the journey of really continuing to evolve and to be innovative and to really drive our industry forward. And we can only do that with the whole of our population, and so for me, it's fundamentally important that we go right from the grassroots and we interact, with schools and young people, all the way up to people like with the diversity inclusion bus group, right up to that post-career journey and what that looks like. So the other thing Women in Transport have been doing is a lot of research, and that's been really interesting to be part of and to sort of watch from a sideline as an ambassador. Being able to mentor has been fantastic. And I'm in my 3rd year as a mentor now, and I can certainly recommend it. The fact that it's matched, that there's a lot of effort and a lot of thought that goes into it, makes it very worthwhile. And then finally on to sort of what I do now as a vice president. So I have a portfolio of volunteering, of events, and of marketing. And you can imagine that's a wonderful thing as a portfolio, but it takes a lot of people and a lot of effort to make that happen. And there's some wonderful volunteers, because we're a not-for-profit. We have a lot of fantastic volunteers that give up their time because they equally see this as important. Now, ideally, we have very open conversations. We'd love to have more people in the room, male and female, and that's the other thing. It's not just a women thing. I personally am raising 2 boys, and I see this role and the work that I do as an important part in shaping and influencing the industry as we move forward. And the opportunity to do that is fantastic, but there's more opportunities than for me or you. There's a vast industry that we have, an industry that hasn't sat down, that has a chronic skills shortage now, that we are really struggling to recruit in some areas, and networks like this are fundamentally important if we want to drive forward. So yeah, that's my sort of my 2 pennies worth, if you like. And over to Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marny and Sonya. That was really insightful. And I should say I'm very lucky to be part of the 3rd cohort of the LEAD programme that Women in Transport are running. We're kind of 2 modules in, and it's proving to be a really enriching experience. So I'm sure we'll kind of touch a bit more on that in a bit. Our next speaker is Philippa Green, who's a research student at the University of Sussex in the Science Policy and Research Unit there, SPRU. Her research focuses on improving gender equality in major UK transport infrastructure projects and has been successfully awarded considerable funding. And as a project ex-associate, Phillippa works alongside leading project management scholars in close conjunction with both industry and government. She's an active member of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Workstream of the Infrastructure Client Group, a nationwide collaboration of major industry and government stakeholders. Phillippa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire, for that very nice introduction. So today I would like to introduce to everyone a certain research report that was put together last year, published in December, and it was done as a collaborative piece with a DFT task force. So this was a predecessor to TEST, the Transport, Employment and Skills Task Force that was introduced by Sonya earlier. And this predecessor task force conducted a piece of research to understand some of the challenges as to why trying to improve gender diversity data of our transport apprenticeship starts was so stubborn, and why is it that increasing gender diversity within transport, why is it so difficult when we seek to do so? So as you can see on the slide in front of you, there is a snapshot of that report. So I would encourage anyone who is interested to take a look for the details of the findings. But for today, I will just give you an overview, an outline, if you will, of those findings. Okay. So the report was split into 3 different sections, and I'd like to make clear that this is not, the findings are not representative of all those members of the transport sector, but rather it was looking at when there are gender inequities or when there are gender problems, what are those problems, and what impacts do those problems have on our professionals. So the report's scope extends beyond transport. So we also looked at the construction industry, as well as engineering as a discipline and project management as a discipline, because it's very hard to kind of make these areas distinct when actually we find that all these different sectors and disciplines are working together and forming our transport culture. So the report is made up of 45 interviews and 6 focus groups with policymakers, practitioners and transport apprentices. And it is formed of 3 different phases. One is where we look at what the gender problems are that we could identify through the data collected, and you can see that I've listed them here. So please have a read. I won't be running through them unless I get questions on particular ones in the discussion, but this is what we found. And with these key themes, I would like to note that a lot of emphasis is put on attracting and recruiting diverse candidates into transport. And yet, if we do not have more transparency around the challenges and struggles on the ground facing those diverse candidates, whether they're women or alternative groups from other protected characteristics, then what we might find is problems in terms of the experiences those candidates have and whether they want to stay with us in our sector, and whether they're able to progress. The next phase of the report looks at the challenges of when we try to intervene with some of the issues that were raised. And this was very interesting, and I think the crux of the challenge in intervening with equality, diversity and inclusion came down to positive discrimination concerns. And again, we can touch on this more in the discussion section for those that are interested, but it's really about breaking down some assumptions about what it is that makes someone best for a job. And if we're trying to appeal to more diverse candidates, using traditional models of evaluation, they might not be deemed the best person for the job by traditional standards, but we might want to be interested in renegotiating what skills are of value to our transport industry moving forwards. And then there were two other elements to the challenges of intervening, one of which is resourcing and the credibility and power of those that are responsible for change. And sometimes it can fall too often to those individuals that are facing the issues, the gender problems, where perhaps we need to move into more of a model where organisations are taking responsibility and empowering the change that may be required. And then the last element was recognising difference. And this was the notion that as someone such as myself, as a white woman, would experience my career differently to if I was, say, a black woman. And that's a very simple demonstration, but it's the idea of perhaps we can have different characteristics that are that we identify with that impact our experiences and perhaps can be provide compounding issues as we try to progress within our careers. And then the last phase of the report was looking at steps forward, and it was a delight to hear Sonya and Marny speaking about mentoring, as that was something that came up as a useful element, and sponsorship. But there are also other things that we can be doing. And again, these are listed in more detail within the report. And I would encourage you to take a look in there for more detail, because I'm sure I've already gone over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there. But if anyone has any questions, we can go into it in the discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Philippa. And I think I would echo, it's a really interesting report and definitely worth taking a look at the details in there, and we can pick up some of the kind of points and interesting parts of that in the discussion as we go on. But next we'll hear from Kate Byers, who is Director and Expert Advisor Capacity Building at Crossrail International. Crossrail International is a specialist advisory practice wholly owned by the UK Government's Department for Transport, which provides strategic advice to client organisations globally developing and delivering complex rail schemes. Kate is responsible for developing client capacity and capability around the world, with a focus on major transport infrastructure programmes and projects to help deliver wider social and economic benefits for our global clients and taking UK best practice overseas. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Claire. Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's a subject that I'm really passionate about. Prior to joining Crossrail International last November, I was leading the skills, employment and education agenda at HS2, and before that on Crossrail, main Crossrail, not Crossrail International, which is incredibly confusing, but hey. And ensuring that we have got people interested in careers in construction, in the rail sector, in the broader transport infrastructure industry is something that I've been really passionate about. It's also something that, to pick up on what Pippa was saying earlier, there are ongoing issues, and I think it's very clear that there's no silver bullet to deal with some of these issues. And what I wanted to do was just kind of look in slightly broader terms about some of the social norms and stereotypes that women face in industry generally, but specifically in industries that are more male dominated, such as transport, construction, etc. And I just wanted to really talk about 3 key points. I think they tie in quite nicely with some of Pippa's findings, and we can maybe dig into them a bit more in the conversations later. But one of the things that I did both at Crossrail and at HS2 was try and speak to young people at a very early age. Gender stereotyping is set from an incredibly early age. And this isn't just a UK issue, this is a global issue. It's evident in every country. And career aspirations and how that ties to gender stereotypes. The research suggests it's set kind of by the age of 7 and doesn't really change between about 7, which is the age of my daughter, who's still in infants, and 18. And I'm currently reading a book called The Authority Gap, very interesting book by Marianne Seeker, and one of the interesting things that she quotes in that book is it's parents as well as teachers as well as others who are influencing those gender stereotypes, but also who are influencing just our broader views on our children. So, for example, Marianne quotes some research where parents were asked about the IQ of their children. Now, obviously, the average IQ for anyone is 100, but when parents were asked about their boys, they thought that their boys' IQ was 115, so well above average. But when they were asked about their girls, it was 107. So already there's these kinds of assumptions inbuilt into some of these findings. So trying to engage young people, to show them different opportunities, to show that those old-fashioned stereotypes no longer have to persist, I think is really important. And another kind of something of an old chestnut around career choices, that, oh, well, women choose to work in lower paid industries. There are some issues with this, I think, or I think the data shows that this is true, but I think it's the why is really interesting and important. So going back to those gender stereotypes, if girls are being steered away from certain subjects in childhood by their parents, by teachers, by their peers, they are less likely to enter some of those. Jobs that are dominated by women, things like care, the care sector, tend to pay less. Now, that isn't necessarily because they're less valuable, it's just that society has valued women's work less. Therefore, jobs dominated by women generally pay less than those dominated by men. And similarly, women don't necessarily enter some of those higher paid professions. And what are the reasons behind that? You know, Marny's mentioned role models. If there are fewer role models in some of those higher paid professions, how can we encourage women to enter those roles? So I again place the importance of role models, the importance, as Pippa was saying, of not just getting people through the door, but what their experience is when they're through the door. And I think there's one disappointing stat. This is a US stat, but in America, men make more money than women, even in female-dominated jobs. So there is no occupation where, as a whole, women earn more than men. The data I have is for the US, but I think sadly that's likely to be true in the UK as well. And then on to that point about the authority gap, that even when people are succeeding in their careers, women generally are more likely to face issues around being taken seriously. There's very often the experience of being talked over in meetings, being mansplained to, those kinds of elements that happens even at a senior level. So if people are making those successful moves in their career, they're still likely to face that unconscious bias. And again, this is a broad issue. It's not just about, oh, men are doing this. Women also fall prey to some of those same unconscious biases. And again, there's lots of interesting examples in the authority gap, which I would recommend to people. And again, touching on the point that Pippa made about intersectionality, those experiences for me, again, as a white woman, are likely to be different for other people. And unfortunately, for women of colour, for those with disabilities, they're likely to face even more difficulties. That all suddenly sounded very depressing, but there are, glimmers of hope, and there are some exciting things that we can talk about in the questions, hopefully. I didn't mean to end that on quite such a downer, but if I hand back over to Clare, thank you.
No, thanks very much, Kate. And that was really interesting. And I think we can pick up on some of those great points in the chat. So if all our speakers can pop their cameras on and the mics on, and we can get into some of the really great questions that are coming through in the chat. So I think one that I thought about and has come up in the chat as well, I think would be interesting to have a bit of a discussion about is kind of the new ways of working that we might see coming out of the pandemic. So obviously this is very much focused on people who are able to work from home, and that's obviously not reflective of the whole transport industry because we have lots of people working on the front line who are not working at home. But I'm interested to know kind of what you think about the potential of the shift to hybrid working means for women's professional development opportunities, because I think from my perspective, I think there are pros and cons, because I think there's definite benefits and it helps people to, you know, maintain their work-life balance and balance care and responsibilities. But is there also a risk that women are less visible in the workplace, and how does that impact on their kind of development and career progression? And interesting, I was just thinking as Kate was talking there about being heard in meetings, I've certainly found it easier to be heard in virtual meetings because there's something equalizing about all being like a head on a screen and raising your hand virtually, it's compared to kind of being in a room. And I've certainly experienced being in a room in a meeting entirely of men and struggling to be heard. So yeah, I don't know who kind of, if anyone particularly wants to come in on that, but I'd be interested to know what people's reflections are about kind of the direction we're heading in and what it might mean for women's professional development in the transport sector.
Shall I start? So I think there's been a lot of talk about women taking on lion's share, so if that's care and responsibilities alongside working, alongside everything. Now, there are pros and cons to hybrid working, visibility being one particularly sensitive topic that, you know, for some people it's worked out great, for some people it hasn't. Equally, if we'd have gone back 3 years ago, just in fact before the pandemic started, I was due to give a presentation on how to negotiate for a day of working from home with women in transport. That presentation never happened, and we obviously don't need that kind of presentation now. But it is certainly a concern that it's very easy now, I think, to be in the shadows. It's also very easy to be bombarded. And there's a lot of stuff, and there's, you know, even things like, you know, mindset stuff that comes out now. There's everything thrown at you. You've got to be this positive, bubbly person all of the time. You've got to have, you know, the children and manage all of that, the home, the career. You know, the reality is, if we'd have gone back, 3 years ago and said, what would you do if you could work at home most of the time? People would be saying, well, I'd have lost 3 stone. I'd have you know, redecorated the whole house. I'd have done all these wonderful things and continued my career because it would have been fabulous. The reality that's bitten has been something rawer than that. So I do think there are some lion's share burdens for some, but also I think it depends on individual circumstances. And I'm certainly coming at it from a position of being a mum, of being a professional, and being a volunteer. I don't know if that brings anything up with my fellow speakers.
That's great. Thanks, Marny. Does anyone else want to come in on this kind of point about, you know, reflecting on the ways we're working now?
I'm happy to, Claire. I think the point that Marny was making about visibility is very much a critical one here. I am continuing to work from home. In my new role, everybody I speak to tends to be overseas, so it's the automatic thing, and that's been very easy. But I know that there has been a push towards going back into the office for a lot of people, which can be really useful in terms of working collaboratively. But my fear is that too often it's about presenteeism and being seen to be in the office, and as opposed to, is this actually driving productivity? Are we doing better as a result of being in the office? Also, my experience of hybrid working in terms of just the tech and things like that, it is not working well. And we've kind of morphed into this new world where we're expected to be on back-to-back meetings, which is just about possible when you're working from home, not good for your mental health and other things. But to try and do that when you're in an office, I think there's a real danger that we get into, at least for a period of transition, and into the worst of both worlds for everyone. But I think that is likely to place a greater burden on women.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Kate. And one of the things I've realised over the last few weeks is I actually feel quite detached from transport infrastructure because I'm not travelling and I'm not experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. And I'm here working on transport policy, and I think I need to get back out there and feel it and do it because yeah, being at home, it's become quite yeah, a bit of a bubble. So yeah, interesting as well. Sonya, Philippa, do you have anything to add on kind of this transition time?
If Sonya doesn't mind, I have a couple of points that come to mind. And I haven't looked at the academic literature on the impacts of COVID on gender, so I'm purely speaking from a personal observations I've made. If I think about my own career opportunities, I can confidently say that they would not have happened had I not been in person at conferences, reaching out to people, having that interpersonal connection to hear about what's going on and to create a community for myself, which has led to the career development. So then with COVID hitting, I found it easier to conduct research, easier to access participants remotely. But I don't think, given the chaos of everything, I think if I hadn't met people in person, I wouldn't have been able to. You don't have much kind of negotiation power as a new person in a space. And then another thing that came to mind was an article I read recently, which I can't remember the citation. So if anyone's particularly interested, do let me know and I can dig it out for you. But it mentioned it was a study on egalitarian couples, and it said that there were fewer of them than you would think in terms of how they've distributed care work and career. And in the cases that they studied, it was actually where the, and this is in heterosexual couples, where the man was doing flexible working and not the woman, that they were able to keep this dynamic. So in terms of advocating for flexible working for women, I'm a bit cautious in that we could, I think, as other speakers have mentioned, end up kind of hurting ourselves in the long run. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Philippa. And I think there's been a question about creating communities, which I definitely want to come back to because I'd be really interested to hear Sonya and Marny's perspectives on that from women in transport. But I just want to ask a quick question first. So obviously reflecting that the transition to hybrid working is very much focused on people in office-based jobs who have the privilege to be able to work from home. I think one question that has come through in advance is around equipment and PPE and facilities for women. And I know, Philippa, that was something that came up in your report really strongly. And Kate, I'd be interested to know your reflections as well, as someone who's worked kind of heavily in the rail sector. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but I'd be just interested to recognise that, people working on the front line are facing very different challenges. And I think that's a really interesting one, thinking about gender in particular.
Kate, do you want to follow up on this and I'll add if I have anything to add?
Yeah, to be honest, this is one that I find slightly depressing that we're still having these conversations, because when I was working on Crossrail, I started in 2009 and some of those issues were coming up then around female PPE, in particular, being expected to wear trousers that were either so big that they were, you were drowning in them, and therefore too long, and all those kinds of issues. I think progress has been made in certain parts of the sector, and particularly things like facilities, in terms of recreational facilities on site, female toilets, those kinds of things. I remember working back in bus garages as well, back in the day. So I have worked for London buses too, and they're just, not being changing facilities for women at all, because the numbers were so small. So I think progress has been made, but I just get the impression if it was the other way around, this issue would have been sorted a long time ago. If you see what I mean, if we were role reversing on this. I do think some progress has been made though. Pippa, did you want to add specifically from the research?
Yeah, so this was one of the themes that came up. So on-site facilities impacting transport apprentices or female engineers. And there was also a trade union study on PPE, which indicated a few years ago, which indicated about 50-60% of women felt hampered down in their career due to inappropriate PPE designed for men. Or the average man. And I have seen good practice in terms of leading organisations overhauling their PPE to address this. But I think the cases that came up in the research were deeper down the supply chain. And I'm not saying that everyone at the top of the supply chain have got it right either. But say maybe some members of the construction sector, or I guess it's all interwoven, but we had cases of women feeling less safe wearing safety shoes than the shoes they'd walked into work in, and the irony is not lost on us with that situation, or inadequate sanitary facilities. And I think there was a case, a rather powerful case of a toilet being blocked, and how it wasn't received very well by management, the issue that was caused. And then it's about reframing it. So it's not that women caused the issue is that they were not accommodated for to begin with, in terms of just having those basic amenities available. But one thing I have noticed in terms of collecting responses to the research is a lot of, after talking about all of the issues, a lot of the, I've come across the idea of particularly male response being like, oh, I can't believe that we're not like having these basic design features available for women. And I couldn't help but kind of almost kind of be like, oh, well, in ways, and I know health and safety is very important, but in ways, I'd rather kind of, if I have to, use alternative things like a moon cup and sort myself out, and then not be disrespected. Or I think for me, the social issues, we just need to be careful to not always focus on the simplicity of the physical needs of women, although it is fundamental, but we can't just focus on that. It has to be part of a wider discussion.
That was great. Thanks very much, Philippa. Sonya, Marny, do you have anything you wanted to add kind of from your experience on reflecting on kind of equipment and PPE and that kind of thing?
Can I just add, so I think some of the frustration for me is that actually the PPE, the appropriate PPE and the solutions for this exist already. So it's not like we don't know that we can add a bin in a toilet, and that would benefit men as well as women, because lots of men have incontinence problems related to prostate, you know, and where do they put things that they need to do? So it's not just, you know, it's about how do you account for the needs of everybody, but actually it's more about how our processes in onboarding people and employees and anybody but women specifically, and making sure they have what they need from day one to safely do their job, as opposed to waiting months or having to really fight just to have access to the things they need to, whether that's an extra small size or whatever it is. And that applies not just to women, but it might be, you know, slight men or whatever. So I think that's my frustration with it. I think that it is something that it's more about systems rather than us not having those things available to solve the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to a point that was made earlier about, you know, making sure that people feel welcome in the workplace, because, you know, facilities are fit for purpose. And someone's added in the chat that men who were interviewed about working in construction sites say that actually as more women have worked on site, facilities have improved for them as well, because now the toilets have toilet paper in. So, you know, it's not, you know, it's improving these things for everyone by taking all these considerations into account. And the other reflection I'd make as well is, you know, as we have more women at more senior levels in these organisations, they help to influence those decisions. So a friend of mine was starting work in a brand new school and all the senior staff were men. She got to the school and none of the girls' toilets had sanitary facilities in. But obviously, if there'd been a more balanced, senior leadership team, that would never have been allowed to happen. And obviously, it was resolved very quickly. But it just shows that you need that representation and to consider these things from the beginning. Otherwise, you end up with a situation like that. So what I'd really like to come back to is a question that was raised in advance around creating a community for women in the sector, and Philippa was saying about that as well. And I think I'd be really interested to hear from Sonya and Marny about the role of women in transport in that. And I think it is linked to me with kind of more remote and hybrid working, because I know for me the women in transport community and the networking that you've run in a virtual way through the pandemic has been a lifeline and has provided some of those opportunities that that we're potentially missing through being at home, and has really kind of, I don't know, energized me about things. And so yeah, maybe you could say a bit more about what you've been doing kind of to create a community for women in the transport sector.
Do you want me to take that, Marny, to start, and you go?
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, having, reflecting on what Pippa said, actually. I think, if I didn't have the community of women in transport, I definitely wouldn't be in this role, clearly, but the opportunities that I've had in my career wouldn't have happened. And so, we've had to pivot like everybody else during the pandemic. We went virtual, but what we've seen is that actually going virtual for everything, where we used to have all of our events face to face, has seen a huge growth in the network. So we had like 300 new members last year, and our volunteers, our fantastic volunteers, ran 42 events of our own, and that ranged from informal networking, interviews, and audience with inspirational guest speaker, women leaders in the industry, professional development workshops. And I think, having, as Claire said, having that safe space and welcoming space that welcomes everybody is really important, and it gives you that opportunity to make connections, to be visible. We look for opportunities to connect women and men, but mainly women in our network, with speaking opportunities as well. And I think one of our participants of the LEAD programme, Jess, was talking this week about how the fact that LEAD is a virtual programme has really helped her and enabled her to do that programme regardless of what other commitments are happening in her day and where she is in the country, because she travels a lot for work. And also, she said that she found it much easier than she expected to form connections, even though the programme's virtual, with all those other women, and to make connections that might not otherwise have happened. So I think, there is a balance. It is fantastic to see people face to face and to make those connections. I had the pleasure of seeing Marny and Steve, who were one of our volunteers, last week, and it was fantastic to see them in person. But I think that these virtual spaces do provide opportunities as well. Marny obviously has a client-facing and an operational role as well, so she has further reflections on that.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, and I've talked already about the role modelling piece, but not even as a role model, but shared experiences. The conversation we were just having about PPE. I remember rocking up to an operational train depot pregnant in men's PPE, and them looking at me and going, "Oh, we just need to do a risk assessment," and quite rightly so. But it's being able to have a community of people that you can bounce these things off, because the research that's been done on the APPG, women are very proud to be working in transport. Doesn't mean there isn't the good, the bad, and the very ugly in terms of experiences. And I think it speaks volumes if you can be in a community that is supportive, that can say, "Hey, I've been there." It actually wasn't that long ago I had to ask someone to take down a page 3 calendar on site, and their response, they weren't too happy about taking it down. Well, I wasn't budging. There's no way that's not the environment that we should be setting up. And what we find is when women come for that networking and that community, I think it really does help if we understand some of those micro cultures that they've been immersed in. and the differences between, say, you know, I've worked in operational roles, I've worked in construction, I've worked in these different areas. My experiences are still gonna be different to other people's, but to have some synergy is so important, and to be able to have that, you know, that kind of, you know, backup and a bit of morale to go, hey, we get this. That I think speaks volumes. And I think the 300 members that joined us last year, even from a hybrid working or a virtual, you know, working pattern, that's been really important for those new members. That they have been able to have conversations. You know, we had a fantastic debate around the wearing of face coverings and being exempt from face coverings. That struck on many chords for people. So to be able to support people and know you're making a difference, some of the feedback we get, I can tell you, it's just so heartwarming to be able to make a positive change in someone's life. So these, you know, the community is valuable, and we all have a role in it, is the other thing I would say. That it's easy to sit on the sidelines, but we're in this together. We make the industry better together. So we have to have a voice together.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And as someone who joined last year, I would, yeah, totally recognise everything you're saying there. And certainly my early experience in the LEAD programme, kind of just sharing those barriers and concerns that you have and hearing that other people feel the same is very affirming. Kate and Philippa, I'd be interested to know kind of your experiences with communities. I don't know, Kate, if you've been involved in any of the communities kind of in rail and building communities for women working in the rail sector.
I've been involved. I've more worked with organisations like Women into Construction, and with WISE, which is Women in Science and Engineering, and WES. I think this is one of the issues, actually. There are lots of different organisations all doing great work, but that in itself can be a little bit daunting for people sometimes. So I've kind of dipped in and out of various different seminars and webinars and things like that from a wide range of different organisations, as opposed to, right, I found my one tribe, if you see what I mean. But I think it's great that there are those different opportunities out there. I've also tried to build my own network. When you, the point that you were just making, Claire, about feeling heard, I think is really important. So we talked about the STAT group earlier. There was a working group of that where I found people in similar roles, a lot of whom were women, who we had shared experience, but also different experiences, and that we kind of connected because of that. So I think that's been important. Also things like staff networks as well on different looking at different areas has been really important. But I think that kind of finding a sense of community through different channels, it's almost like an overlapping Venn diagram of all these different groups. I think that's how it's been for me anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, it is a really important reflection. There are lots of different groups and professional bodies and, you know, supporting, you know, different parts of the sector. And I think you're right. It sometimes is kind of finding your tribe. And if there isn't a specific fit for you, it's kind of building your own tribe as well. And yeah, no, I think that's a really, really valuable point. Philippa, do you have anything to kind of add on this kind of?
I guess I just wanted to add how transport, due to the hard work of people such as Sonya, Marny, Kate, that transport has a community that can be joined. Just after I had an in-depth conversation with a woman joining the UK Army, and she was saying how she hadn't been prepared for the inequalities that she faced, and she'd been naive when joining. And she said, all I want is like just like someone I know I can go to say this happened. What do you advise? How do I handle this? Just like a kind of kind face, or like a welcoming person or contact. And if it's that stark between, if there's so few women in a space, then it can be incredibly lonely, and the impact on well-being is quite devastating. So just comparing that scenario to then hearing about the work of the mentoring group and the 42 events that volunteers held, like it makes a big difference to have that companionship. But then on the flip side, if I think another perspective is also that we can risk these kind of groups turning into talking shops where everyone has a shared understanding of the problems, but may not be empowered to do some of the structural organizational work with intervening. And this is where I just wanted to emphasize that organizations, departments need to be feeling responsible for this, and that affinity groups are a great thing to have, but I don't think that they can do it on their own. So yeah.
No, that's great, Philippa, and actually leads us really well into something else that I want to discuss from your work, if we can stay with you for a minute, around kind of, I don't know, you kind of introduced it there around some of the structural stuff that organisations need to do, and one of the things you kind of picked up in the report was around positive discrimination. So I wonder if you could say a bit more about that and the role of kind of positive discrimination in kind of women's professional opportunities.
Yeah, I think this was one of the elements of the report that I found most interesting and intriguing, and how do you get your head around the different narratives and different perspectives that are going on in this space. But yes, so there is concern that with pressures to demonstrate gender diversity, that shortcuts may be taken to recruit. We need someone that looks like this, we need someone that has this characteristic and that characteristic. And I know that people don't like being treated like that because we're all human, and it's quite dehumanizing to feel that you've been selected on that basis alone. So this is the risk that equality, diversity and inclusion interventions can have if it's misunderstood. So I think what we forget is, what we forget is that this is about innovation, this is about experimenting, this is about new ways of working, this needs fresh minds, different perspectives. And if we are labeling someone as the wrong person for the job just because they don't fit your traditional kind of ways of evaluating, and I think I touched on this earlier, but I guess okay. So another point I want to raise on that is that two very large organisations that I was able to interview mentioned that their data does not support that there is positive discrimination happening. So that's why I put perceived. And I think this is important to raise that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is the damages of these concerns. And in the report, they've been split into 3 different impacts. And one is that it delegitimizes our hiring of diverse candidates, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. And it creates a stigma of incompetence, which you may, I don't know whether you've come across it yourselves in your own walks of life, but it's certainly not pleasant or constructive. And then off the back of this, we can have people feeling under pressure to outperform, to prove that they are worthy, that they can excel beyond all other candidates, to say, look, you can't tell me that I don't deserve this opportunity. But the level of pressure that puts on someone, and the level of pressure we put on, say, senior women to be excellent beyond compare, is too much. It's unsustainable, and it can lead to burnout. And I just wanted to say, if we're looking for gender equality, then this is not a gender equal situation where you have a woman being representing all women, and if she's seen in one perspective to be I don't know, underperforming, then then we might be like, oh, we shouldn't have recruited women for the sake of recruiting women. This is not what this is about. And men do not face the same level of scrutiny. If there's a poorer performing man, then people don't even notice. It's in a sea of other men, so it's you're not as visible. So yeah, so we can have this insane pressure to outperform, and I don't envy it. I do think we have serious problems here. And then it goes back down to, we need to better educate ourselves of the issues, and this isn't just women educating ourselves on the issues, although I found it empowering to do so, but really we can't do it on our own. Women can't be expected to face the issues, excel in their job, and then solve all the structural issues in the organisation. It's not happening. So yeah, I think, again, bringing in that organisational responsibility, and perhaps educating the more traditional demographics in transport so that they can better understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, Philippa. And I think often what gets forgotten is the why we're doing this, doesn't it? It gets lost in the, oh, we need to bring in X people so we look more representative, but the why gets lost, and then you don't necessarily get the cultural change that makes sure that people feel welcome when they arrive. And you know, people have sort of suggested that already. I'd like to hear from any of the other panelists kind of on this space of kind of positive discrimination and kind of the burden that's placed on kind of women and in their professional kind of development. I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of come in. I saw some nods kind of coming as Philippa was talking there. Marny?
Yeah, I'll come in on this one. So this actually comes up quite a lot. So in women I've mentored, in senior women that I've spoken to, and there is, exactly as Philippa said, that pressure. And the important thing is that we get to a point where, you know, that you have to compete. You have to feel worthy of your role. I wouldn't want, after all the hard work I've put into my career, to be given a job just because I'm a woman. It's just not what I want. I want to be recognised for my technical ability, to be recognised for my experience, to be recognised for what I bring to that role. And that's pretty much the conversation that's been had over and over. And all the points, you know, around performance and stuff like that, you are competing, but visibly competing. And it's that visibility that, you know, in addition to doing all the things like Philippa, you know, you've got to be the role model. You've got to role model these things. That takes time. You've then got to, as we've already talked about, the lion's share aspect of, you know, perhaps caring responsibilities or just life admin, because I don't know about you, but life admin seems to go up a lot as well. And to be able to do all of these things and manage all these things and compete, it doesn't mean, the important thing is, it doesn't mean that we're not looking at the men in our industry and saying, hey, you don't do any of this. We know they do. We know they do. But fundamentally, we know we have fewer women, and that there is a likelihood, a probability that they are doing more of the lion's share of stuff outside of trying to compete in their work role. And positive discrimination is very important that people understand what it actually means. And you know, things like when you are going for new roles, being seen to be assertive is not being bossy. Being told that, hey, you're a great role model, but for whatever reason that role's not going to be yours. There's a lot of uncertainty around the words positive discrimination. Well, is that positive discrimination? Actively, you may not get the role. And I think that can be its whole own conversation. But this is why these discussions are so important. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in. That was a slightly rambled message, but.
Oh, great. Sonya, Kate, anything to add on this?
I just have something. I think you're spot on, Pippa. You know, it's that organisational responsibility. It's, you know, it's a societal responsibility, it's an industry responsibility to really own the fact that, as echoed in your report, you know, we can't just keep expecting to do the same things and expect a different result. We can see from, you know, all of the effort from the 4 years of the Strategic Task Force for Apprenticeships, it only made a 2% difference to female starts. So we know we're not doing enough. And that can't be solved by just organisations like all the Women in Networks and all of the charities and the largely volunteer effort that happens across the industry. Now, what I have seen, and I'm really heartened by, really, is some of the progress we've made, like in our diversity and inclusion bus group, and I can see like how powerful it is when organisations kind of, because they all want to do the right thing, and they understand the importance of diversity and inclusion and gender equality and all of those things, they kind of remove the kind of commercial interest in it to a certain extent, obviously, and share in a really open way what are they doing as organisations, what's going well, what isn't going well, what hasn't worked, and collaborating together so that we can get better at doing these things and really test out and pilot different ways of working, and really challenge some of our assumptions and being open to doing that. So I do think it's really powerful when we come together as industry and when we start to break down some of these silos, some of these ways of working that aren't really working as industry, and when we really own that as a sector and own that this is something that we need to do together, I think that's when we will start to see the pace of change accelerate, as opposed to this kind of glacial rate of change that we're experiencing up to now.
Great, thank you very much, Sonya. Kate, would you like to add anything?
So sorry, I had to unmute.
No?
In terms of the positive discrimination, when I was at HS2, we did try a number of different initiatives, and some of which were really interesting. Things like the using gap jumpers, which was a way of trying to eliminate some of the unconscious bias. So as opposed to having a CV with no name on it, there was no CV involved. There are a series of questions which people who made it through an initial sift were asked, and results were judged on how well people answered those questions. Now, obviously, that throws up certain issues for certain other disadvantaged groups in terms of how they respond to those questions. But where you have, I think we piloted it with some commercial roles, where there are a large number of roles, we saw that the proportion of women getting through that sift was substantially higher than when it was based on a recruiter and a line manager looking at CVs or a cover letter. So I think there are things that can be done. I think more innovation is needed, to Pippa's point, that we need to try doing some different things. And as Sonya said, we can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So again, there's no silver bullet, but I think it's worth trying these different approaches to try and make the changes to try and accelerate.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Kate. And it kind of touches on some of the things that have been raised in the chat around, our focus on technical expertise, chartership, some of these things that are maybe barriers to people's progression. But yeah, like you say, trying different things offers a really good opportunity to kind of tackle some of those challenges. So we're running short on time, and I think so. One I want to do really quickly, and then a final question. So Jenny asked about what personal skills do women need to learn to thrive, and I think it also links to this question about assertiveness and bossiness. So yeah, I don't know, maybe you could each offer kind of one thing you think women need to learn to thrive in the transport sector, and I'll just kind of pick on people to save time and kind of waiting for people to come in. So Kate, you're already on mute, so could we start with you?
Sure. So as I was mentioning earlier, I think that there can be an issue with women. If we are assertive, it's viewed as bossy, but there's also that other dichotomy between likable and competent, which women get hamstrung by, which is just ridiculous. But I think very often, this isn't true for all women, we are often seen as and can be more empathetic. And I think we should be leaning into that to be able to read the room, to be able to pick up on those kinds of social skills that we've got to enable us to see if us doing something is perceived in that negative way and try a different tact. On one level, we shouldn't have to, but that's what I try and do anyway. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. Philippa?
I think, as I've mentioned, I really do try and avoid putting the emphasis on women to solve this. So I'm a bit uncomfortable by that angle of the question.
That's okay.
Yeah, maybe because we've got so little time, I'd prefer if other speakers perhaps tackled this.
No, that's
yeah.
fine. Don't worry. Marny?
So similar to what Philippa just sort of alluded to there, I wrote down two things. One is, you know, who's in your boardroom, understanding the culture around you that you're working within. I think that's absolutely key, especially if you're looking at progression, and understanding the culture that you're surrounded by is a fundamental part of being able to progress in that environment. I've heard it described in other ways. I remember a senior figure in the industry once saying, "Know the game that's being played." And I you know, these are our lives, these are our careers. It's not about playing games. It's about knowing yourself and knowing the culture around you and how you maneuver that. And join women in transport. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah. And Sonya?
So what I would say is less about what skills you specifically need, but actually echoing what everyone said today at some point. It's about your community. So build networking, get comfortable with networking and build a network of support around you that's right for you. And whether that's Women in Transport or another organisation or a different type of network for you, but build a network of support that can hold you up, can pull you up and can be there as your safety net when you need them, because then you can be yourself. You can be yourself and thrive in this sector. You absolutely can. Just build up the right network around you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think what I was going to say is that I think being yourself and being authentic is probably it's hard. Is that a skill, or is that kind of, you know, having the confidence to be yourself in a workplace? But I think you're right that, like, you know, having a community who lifts you up and makes you believe in yourself is you know, a big part of that. So finally, what I would like to ask everyone to do is give me an example of best practice, or I know we say there's no silver bullets, which I absolutely agree with, but if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing, you know, what would your priority be? So either a really nice example of best practice, or kind of a what you would do if you could wave a magic wand and change something tomorrow. So I'll go in reverse order that we just went. So Sonya, if I can start with you.
I think the organisations that do really well are the ones that think about diversity and inclusion in the whole, and they embed it across every single thing they do, every touch point, across every system, and don't think of it as a policy that sits outside of everything else.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Sonya. Marny?
Oh gosh, it's a really tricky one. I would love to really understand, and I noticed in the chat there was some words about sort of progression and different routes into the industry. I would love to really map out the diversity of entry routes into the industry, which sounds really simple, but I can assure you when you get into it, it's actually not. To really make it clear and to showcase how diverse the work that we do is, and how you can have a fantastic career that spans so many facets of transport.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Marny. That was great. Philippa?
I think as a researcher, I'm all for open experimental innovation, test things out, be open to that process, collect data, numerical, non-numerical, to see how you're doing and have a cycle of evaluating, so that you're actually trying to monitor your performance, not just about diversity and counting heads, but how are people feeling? How's your intervention going? Like, I'd like to see more of this.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Philippa. And I feel like every one of these webinars, data has come up as as a challenge to kind of making progress on gender and transport. So it wouldn't be right if we didn't talk about it today. And finally, Kate.
I love Pippa's point about the data. I'm a data geek and I really like to see the impact. But that's kind of linked to what I would say is my kind of wish is that as I said, I've got a 7-year-old daughter, I've got an 11-year-old son. I really, really hope that when they're entering the workforce, we're not still having these same conversations. It just feels, I've been in the industry close on 20 years, and there has undoubtedly been progress in some areas, but others just feel really sticky. And that's what my hope is, that we can increase the rate of change.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all ever so much. And I think there were really kind of positive reflections to end on there. I really enjoyed the discussion and hearing from all your kind of knowledge and expertise. And this will be available to watch back on YouTube soon. But thanks very much, everyone. I hope you all have a great afternoon.